The first ship appeared over Earth on a Tuesday morning, casting shadows across major cities like a storm cloud that refused to move. Admiral Sarah Chen watched from the bridge of the Orbital Defense Station as more vessels materialized from hyperspace, their alien designs unlike anything in Earth's databases. Within hours, the skies above every continent held at least one massive craft, each one the size of Manhattan and bristling with technology that made human ships look like paper airplanes. "Ma'am, we're receiving a transmission," Communications Officer Torres reported, his voice tight with tension. "It's coming through on all frequencies simultaneously." Chen nodded grimly. "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing a creature that could only be described as vaguely reptilian, though its scales shimmered with an oily iridescence that seemed to shift colors in the light. When it spoke, the words came through a translation matrix that rendered its voice in cold, precise English. "Greetings, inhabitants of the third planet. I am High Commander Vex Thul of the Hegemony Council. Your world has been selected to receive a gift from the civilized galaxy." The creature's lipless mouth curved in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Consider this an honor, though I suspect your primitive species will fail to see it as such." Chen felt her jaw clench. 3 years of first contact protocols, endless simulations and training scenarios, and humanity's introduction to galactic civilization was delivered like a threat wrapped in diplomatic language. 6 million refugees from the failed state of HFY await transport to your surface, Vex Thul continued. These beings lost their homeworld to their own incompetence and warfare. The Hegemony Council has voted, and Earth shall provide sanctuary for these displaced persons. We trust that a species such as yours will treat them with appropriate hospitality. 17. The transmission cut without warning, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Chen stared at the blank screen, processing the implications. 6 million refugees. No negotiation. No discussion of terms or resources. Just a unilateral decision from beings who clearly viewed humanity as something less than equals. "Admiral," Torres said quietly, "we're detecting massive energy readings from the ships. They're preparing to begin transport." Chen activated her command channel to Earth's surface. "This is Admiral Chen to Global Defense Command. We have a situation." The next 72 hours would have tested any civilization's resolve. But humanity approached the crisis with characteristic determination and creativity. While politicians argued and military leaders prepared for various scenarios, ordinary citizens took action. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the converted airplane hangar that had become Houston's primary refugee processing center, watching as the first transport beam deposited a group of alien beings onto the reinforced concrete floor. The HFY were humanoid but distinctly alien, their blue-gray skin marked with intricate patterns that seemed to shift like living tattoos. Many clutched primitive belongings, their large eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. "Remember," she told her team of volunteer translators and medical personnel, "they've lost everything. They're probably terrified, confused, and expecting the worst from us." She paused, watching as a small HFY child pressed closer to what appeared to be its parent. "Let's show them something better." The first refugee she approached was an elderly male whose intricate skin patterns had faded to pale silver. He flinched when she raised her hands, but relaxed slightly when she spoke in carefully practiced HFY phrases that the linguists had pieced together from intercepted communications. "Welcome to Earth," she said, hoping her pronunciation was close enough to be understood. "You are safe here. We will help you." The alien's eyes widened in surprise, not at her words, but at the tone. Elena had spoken with genuine warmth, the same voice she used with frightened patients in the emergency room where she normally worked. The elderly HFY looked around the hangar, taking in the organized stations where humans waited to provide food, medical attention, and basic necessities. "Safe?" he repeated in halting English, as if the concept didn't quite translate properly. "Safe," Elena confirmed, gently guiding him toward the medical station. "We're here to help." Across the globe, similar scenes played out in hundreds of hastily converted facilities. The logistics alone should have been impossible. 6 million beings, each with unique dietary requirements, medical needs, and cultural considerations. Earth's governments had collectively panicked. But humanity's response came from a different source entirely. Social media exploded with coordination efforts. Retired teachers offered language instruction. Farmers provided information about which Earth crops might be suitable for HFY digestion. Engineers volunteered to study alien technology and help refugees adapt their tools and equipment to Earth's environment. Within 48 hours, the largest volunteer relief effort in human history was operational across 6 continents. Marcus Thompson, a construction foreman from Detroit, found himself leading a team of volunteers in building temporary housing structures. The hegemony ships had provided basic survival equipment for the refugees, but the shelters were clearly designed for short-term use. They were little more than metal boxes with minimal life support. "These ain't fit for dogs," Marcus muttered, examining the alien shelter design. No insulation, no privacy, barely enough room for a family. He turned to his team of contractors, electricians, and plumbers who had driven in from across the Midwest. "We can do better." Within a week, Marcus and teams like his around the world had designed and begun constructing proper housing. They studied HFY cultural preferences through careful observation and patient communication, learning that the aliens valued communal gathering spaces but also required private areas for meditation, and what appeared to be a form of artistic expression involving the manipulation of light patterns. The housing that emerged was uniquely human in its pragmatic compassion. Each family unit included space for HFY cultural practices, while incorporating human innovations in comfort and efficiency. Solar panels powered heating and cooling systems adapted for alien physiology. Gardens were planned with earth plants that could supplement HFY dietary needs. But perhaps the most remarkable development occurred in the smaller interactions. The moments when individual humans encountered individual HFY and chose connection over fear. In a temporary camp outside Berlin, 8-year-old Maria Hoffman approached a young HFY who sat alone near the edge of the medical tent. The alien child had been separated from its family during the chaotic transport process, and despite the best efforts of human volunteers, no relatives had been located. Maria didn't speak any HFY, and the alien child knew no German or English. But when Maria sat down beside the small figure and began drawing pictures in the dirt, something universal occurred. The HFY child watched as Maria sketched crude images of herself, her family, her dog. Then, hesitantly, the young alien began adding its own marks to the dirt. What followed was a conversation conducted entirely in drawings and gestures. Maria showed the child how to fold paper into simple origami shapes, while the HFY demonstrated how its people created light patterns with their fingertips, a bioluminescent ability that no human had previously observed. When Maria's mother found them an hour later, the 2 children were sitting close together, sharing cookies while the alien child painted shifting patterns of soft blue light across Maria's delighted face. Stories like this spread across human communication networks faster than any government statement or news broadcast. Videos, photos, and first-hand accounts of ordinary humans, extending extraordinary kindness to the displaced HFY, began to reshape how Earth's population viewed the situation. Dr. James Okafor, a xenobiology professor at Oxford, who had been called in to assist with refugee health assessments, found himself deeply moved by what he observed. The HFY were clearly an advanced species, their technology sophisticated despite the primitive conditions of their displacement. But they had arrived expecting hostility, cruelty, and indifference. "They keep asking when the punishments will begin," he explained during a video conference with other researchers. Their own translation of what the hegemony told them suggests they believed Earth was chosen specifically because humans would treat them poorly. They were told we are a violent, selfish species that would either enslave them or simply let them die. Instead, they found a species that mobilized its entire civilization to help strangers from another star. Human governments, initially overwhelmed by the scale of the crisis, found themselves racing to catch up with their own citizens' humanitarian response. Emergency funding was allocated. Military resources were repurposed for refugee support, and international cooperation reached levels not seen since the last global war. The hegemony ships remained in orbit, their crews presumably watching Earth's response to their unwanted gift. No further communication came from High Commander Vexthal or his representatives, but sensor readings suggested the alien vessels were conducting detailed scans of the refugee camps and human relief efforts. Admiral Chen continued to monitor the situation from her orbital station, coordinating with ground-based authorities while keeping a wary eye on the hegemony fleet. The aliens' technology was clearly superior to humanity's, but their intentions remained unclear. Had they genuinely expected Earth to provide sanctuary for 6 million refugees? Or was this some kind of test, perhaps even a prelude to invasion? Admiral, Lieutenant Santos reported from the sensor station, "We're detecting increased activity from the lead hegemony vessel. Energy readings are spiking across multiple systems." Chen moved to examine the readings herself. After days of relative quiet, the alien ships were definitely doing something. Any change in their position? Negative, ma'am. They're maintaining geosynchronous orbit over the major refugee settlements. As Chen watched the energy patterns shift across her displays, she wondered if humanity's response had surprised the hegemony as much as it had surprised the refugees themselves. 6 million displaced beings had been dumped on Earth like an unwanted burden, but humanity had embraced them as guests in need of help. Down on Earth's surface, that embrace was becoming stronger every day. Language barriers were falling as dedicated volunteers learned basic HFY communication. Cultural exchanges were emerging naturally as humans and aliens discovered shared interests in art, music, and storytelling. Children on both sides seemed particularly adept at finding common ground, their play transcending species barriers. In Sao Paulo, a group of HFY engineers had begun working with human counterparts to design water purification systems that could serve both species' needs. In Sydney, HFY musicians had discovered that their light-pattern compositions could be translated into visual displays that allowed humans to experience their art form. In Cairo, mixed teams of human and alien archaeologists were comparing notes on ancient civilizations, finding remarkable parallels in how different species approached the challenge of building lasting societies. But perhaps the most significant development was occurring in the refugee camps themselves. The temporary settlements were evolving into something unprecedented in human experience. The first truly integrated human-alien communities. HFY families were taking human surnames in order to integrate more smoothly into Earth's bureaucratic systems, while human volunteers were learning alien customs and incorporating them into the camp's social structures. The settlements were becoming testing grounds for interspecies cooperation on a scale that no one had imagined possible just weeks before. And at the center of it all was a simple human choice that had apparently confounded an entire galactic civilization. When presented with 6 million strangers in need, Earth had chosen mercy over malice, compassion over cruelty. As the first month of integration drew to a close, it was becoming clear that the hegemony's intended punishment had become something else entirely. Earth's refugee camps were transforming into permanent settlements. The aliens were adapting to human society while maintaining their own cultural identity, and humanity was learning that their capacity for kindness extended far beyond their own species. The real question now was how the hegemony would respond to this unexpected outcome. Their ships remained in orbit, watching and waiting, while down below, two species worked together to build something neither had imagined possible: a shared future among the stars. 3 months after the first, HFY transport beams deposited their unwilling cargo on Earth's surface. The planet had become something neither species had expected. The temporary refugee camps had evolved into thriving, integrated communities, and the first mixed-species cities were emerging across every continent. What began as a humanitarian crisis had transformed into humanity's first real step toward becoming a truly galactic civilization. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the observation deck of New Geneva Station, the first joint human-HFY research facility, watching the sunrise paint the Swiss Alps in shades of gold and rose. Below her, the settlement sprawled across the valley floor, its architecture a unique blend of human engineering and HFY aesthetic sensibilities. Solar collectors designed with alien efficiency powered buildings whose flowing curves would have been impossible before human engineers learned HFY construction techniques. "The integration statistics are remarkable," said Keth Moore, her research partner and one of the first HFY to master written English. His skin patterns shifted to display complex data visualizations as he spoke, a form of communication that human scientists were still learning to interpret. Psychological adaptation rates exceed all projections. Cultural exchange appears to be accelerating rather than creating friction. Elena nodded, reviewing the reports on her tablet. The data told an extraordinary story. Mixed human HFY work teams were outperforming both species working separately. Crime rates in integrated settlements were actually lower than in purely human communities. Educational programs that included both species' children were producing learning outcomes that surprised educators on both sides. But perhaps most remarkable was the technological exchange occurring at every level of society. HFY refugees had arrived with knowledge of stellar engineering, gravity manipulation, and biological sciences that were centuries ahead of human development. In return, humans offered something the HFY had apparently lost somewhere in their species' advancement: the ability to innovate from first principles, to find simple solutions to complex problems. Have you seen the water reclamation project in Morocco? Elena asked, pulling up holographic displays that showed massive installations in the Sahara Desert. Human desalination technology, combined with HFY atmospheric processors, they're creating an oasis that could support 1 million beings of both species. Kethmore's patterns shifted to what Elena had learned, indicated pleasure and approval. And the agricultural stations in Argentina, HFY soil modification techniques have increased crop yields by 300%. Enough food to feed not just the refugees, but to eliminate hunger across much of South America. The success was so remarkable that it had begun attracting attention from beyond Earth's atmosphere. Over the past month, Admiral Chen had detected increasing communications traffic from the hegemony ships. The alien fleet remained in orbit, but their behavior suggested they were reporting extensively to some higher authority. There's something else, Elena said, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. I've been analyzing the psychological profiles of the HFY Leadership Council. They're displaying symptoms consistent with severe cultural trauma. It's not just that they lost their homeworld. Something about the way it happened has left them profoundly damaged as a society. Kethmore's patterns stilled. A reaction Elena had learned indicated deep concentration or distress. You should speak with Elder Zimthara. She remembers the last days of HFY Prime. The conversation with Elder Zimthara took place in the memorial garden that the HFY had constructed at the center of each settlement. It was their way of honoring the dead while celebrating life, a combination of living art and sacred space that had deeply moved human observers. The garden in New Geneva featured plants from both worlds, their roots intertwining in soil that had been blessed according to both human and HFY customs. Dr. Vasquez, the elderly HFY said, her patterns displaying formal respect mixed with deep sorrow. You wish to understand our pain. This is not a small thing to ask. Elena sat carefully on the bioluminescent moss that served as seating in the garden, choosing her words with care. I believe understanding your past might help us build a better future together, but only if you're willing to share. Zimthara was silent for several minutes, her patterns cycling through what Elena recognized as complex emotional states. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. We were not always refugees, she began. Once, we were explorers, innovators, builders of wonders that spanned star systems. Our technology was advanced, our society stable, our future bright. Her patterns darkened to deep purple and black. But we grew comfortable, complacent. We believed our wisdom was complete. The story that emerged was a cautionary tale that resonated deeply with human observers who had lived through their own species' near extinctions. The HFY had achieved technological mastery, eliminated poverty and disease, and created what they believed was a perfect society. But in their pursuit of perfection, they had eliminated the chaos and struggle that drove innovation and growth. We stopped questioning, Zimthara explained. Stopped exploring. Stopped taking risks. When the crisis came, we had no idea how to respond with anything but our existing tools and knowledge, and when those proved insufficient, we simply froze. The crisis had been a chain reaction of environmental collapse triggered by cosmic radiation from a nearby stellar explosion. The HFY had the technology to deflect or absorb the radiation, but their social systems had become so rigid that they couldn't adapt their solutions quickly enough to meet the changing threat. "We watched our world die while holding the keys to save it," Zimthara said, her patterns now displaying a grief so profound that Elena felt tears forming in her own eyes. Not from lack of knowledge, but from inability to act decisively when our perfect plans proved imperfect. It was a failure that had shattered the Zephai's confidence in their own civilization. The survivors who escaped their dying world carried not just the trauma of loss, but the deeper wound of knowing they had failed through their own limitations, rather than external forces beyond their control. "The hegemony knew this when they brought us here," Zimthara continued. "They expected us to become your burden, and your people to respond with the same rigid thinking that destroyed our world. They believed you would try to maintain your existing systems while forcing us to adapt to them, creating conflict and eventual failure." Elena felt pieces clicking into place. "But that's not what happened." "No," Zimthara agreed, her patterns shifting to display something that might have been wonder. "Your people did something we thought was impossible. You changed. Individually and collectively, you transformed your entire civilization in response to our arrival. Not to maintain your systems, but to create new ones that could serve both species." The conversation continued for hours, with other Zephi elders joining as word spread through the settlement. What emerged was a picture of humanity that the refugees found both inspiring and deeply humbling. They had been sent to Earth expecting to find a species as rigid and limited as they had become, only to discover beings who seemed capable of infinite adaptation and growth. "You take things that shouldn't work together and make them work anyway," said another elder, whose patterns displayed mathematical concepts that human computers were still learning to interpret. "Your water purification systems violate basic efficiency principles, yet they function better than our optimized designs. Your architecture ignores structural theory, yet it stands stronger than our calculated engineering." A younger Zephi researcher named Velthar had been studying human problem-solving approaches for weeks. "It's not that you're more intelligent than we are," he explained. "It's that you don't limit your thinking to established patterns. When you encounter a problem, you don't just apply existing solutions, you create entirely new approaches." The discussion was interrupted by an urgent communication from Admiral Chen's orbital station. The hegemony fleet had suddenly changed its behavior, with the lead ship beginning a rapid descent toward Earth's surface. Energy readings suggested they were preparing for some kind of direct intervention. Within hours, the massive hegemony vessel had settled into a geosynchronous hover above the New Geneva settlement, casting its shadow across the valley. The ship was easily 50 times larger than anything humanity had built, its alien architecture radiating power and authority that made Earth's most advanced technology look primitive. High Commander Vexthal's transmission came through on all frequencies simultaneously, just as his initial communication had months before. But this time, his tone carried notes of confusion and something that might have been concern. "Inhabitants of the third planet," he began, his reptilian features appearing on screens throughout the settlement. "The Hegemony Council requires clarification regarding your treatment of the Zephi refugees." Admiral Chen coordinated the human response from her station. But it was Elena who found herself speaking for the integrated community when Vexthal demanded to communicate with the refugee leadership. "High Commander," she said, standing beside Elder Zimthara in the memorial garden while the alien ship loomed overhead. "We're not sure what clarification you need. The Zephi are our guests and our partners. They're building new lives here, contributing to our society while maintaining their own cultural identity." Vexthal's expression suggested this was not the answer he had expected. "Our observations indicate extensive technological exchange between your species. This was not the intention of the Council's decision to relocate the refugees to your world." "What was the intention?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The hegemony commander's pause lasted long enough that several Zephi in the garden began displaying patterns of anticipation and anxiety. When he finally spoke, his words confirmed what Elder Zimthara had suggested. "The Zephi were placed on your world because the Council believed your species would prove incapable of integrating such a large refugee population successfully. The anticipated failure would have served as a valuable lesson regarding the consequences of social stagnation and technological complacency. The blunt admission sent ripples of shock through both the human and HFY populations listening to the conversation. The hegemony had deliberately chosen Earth not as a sanctuary for refugees, but as a stage for their calculated failure and eventual extinction. But you didn't fail, Vexthul continued, his tone now carrying unmistakable bewilderment. Instead, both species appear to be thriving in ways that our models suggested were impossible. The Council requires an explanation for this deviation from predicted outcomes. Elena found herself looking around the garden at the integrated community that had formed around her. Human children played with young HFY, while their parents collaborated on engineering projects. Scientists from both species shared data and theories in a constant exchange of knowledge. Artists were creating new forms of expression that incorporated both visual and bioluminescent elements. Maybe your models were wrong, she said simply. Maybe you underestimated what's possible when different species choose cooperation over competition, compassion over cruelty. The silence that followed her words stretched long enough that some observers wondered if the transmission had been cut. Finally, Vexthul spoke again. And for the first time since his initial announcement, uncertainty crept into his voice. The Council will require additional observation before making any determinations regarding your world's future status. The hegemony fleet will remain in position until further notice. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the settlement in thoughtful quiet. Elena looked up at the massive ship hanging in the sky above them, its shadow no longer seeming quite as ominous as it had that morning. They're scared, Elder Zimthara observed, her patterns displaying complex analytical sequences. Not of your weapons or your military. They're scared of what you represent. Which is what? Elena asked. Proof that there are different ways to approach the challenges of civilization. Kethmore replied, having arrived during the conversation with several other researchers. Your species has demonstrated that stagnation isn't inevitable, that intelligence and compassion can grow together rather than excluding each other. As the day progressed and normal life resumed in the settlement, Elena found herself thinking about the implications of the hegemony's admission. Somewhere among the stars, there was a galactic civilization so convinced of its own superiority that it had used 6 million refugees as pawns in a demonstration designed to prove human inadequacy. Instead, they had accidentally created the first successful integration of two spacefaring species in recorded galactic history. The intended lesson in failure had become a masterclass in the possibilities that emerged when different peoples chose trust over suspicion, creativity over rigid adherence to established patterns. That evening, as bioluminescent patterns from the HFY gardens painted the settlement in shifting colors, Elena stood once again on the observation deck of the research station. The hegemony ship hung overhead like a dark promise of uncertain intentions, but below her, two species were building something neither had imagined possible just months before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth and integration. The hegemony might attempt to interfere, or they might simply continue observing while their representatives tried to understand how their carefully calculated punishment had transformed into humanity's greatest achievement. But tonight, in settlements across Earth, 6 million former refugees were falling asleep in homes they had helped to build, surrounded by neighbors from another species who had chosen to welcome strangers as family. It was a choice that had changed not just Earth, but the entire galaxy's understanding of what intelligence and compassion could accomplish together. 6 months after High Commander Vexthul's unexpected visit to New Geneva, the hegemony fleet had grown from 12 ships to nearly 100, representing dozens of different species from across the galaxy. What had begun as an observation mission had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. The first interstellar diplomatic conference, hosted on a previously unknown world. Admiral Sarah Chen found herself in the surreal position of coordinating orbital traffic control for vessels whose technology surpassed human understanding by centuries. Her defense station had been expanded with both human and HFY engineering to accommodate the influx of visitors, creating a structure that looked like no space habitat ever conceived by a single species. Admiral, Lieutenant Santos reported, "We have 3 more vessels requesting landing clearance. The first is from the Koran Republic, The second represents something called the Methane Collective, and the third. He paused, checking his readings twice. Appears to be a ship from the Hegemony Council itself. Chen studied the tactical display showing the approaching vessels. Each ship was unique in design, representing different evolutionary paths and technological approaches to spaceflight. Some were crystalline structures that seemed to grow rather than being built. Others appeared to be living organisms modified for space travel. The diversity was staggering. "Clear them for landing at designated coordinates," she instructed. "And Lieutenant? Alert Dr. Vasquez that we're about to have some very interesting new guests." Down on Earth's surface, the transformation was even more remarkable. The original refugee settlements had grown into bustling cities that served as showcases for interspecies cooperation. Representatives from across the galaxy were arriving daily to observe what many were calling the Earth experiment. The first successful integration of multiple intelligent species on a single world. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the central plaza of New Geneva, watching as a delegation of insectoid beings from the Chitinous Alliance examined the bioluminescent gardens that had become the settlement's signature feature. Their crystalline translation devices crackled with rapid-fire conversations as they studied how HFY biological art had been enhanced with human horticultural techniques. "They're fascinated by the collaborative aspects," explained Zindar, a young HFY who had become the settlement's unofficial cultural interpreter. "Their species maintains strict separation between different subspecies. The concept of voluntary integration challenges their fundamental understanding of how intelligence operates." Elena nodded, reviewing her notes on the visiting delegations. Each group brought their own perspectives on interspecies contact, but most shared a common assumption that had apparently dominated galactic thinking for millennia: that advanced civilizations naturally competed rather than cooperated. That contact between species inevitably led to conquest or segregation. Dr. Vasquez, called Marcus Thompson, the construction foreman who had become the settlement's head of infrastructure development. "We've got the amphitheater ready for this afternoon's presentation. Integrated environmental controls for 37 different atmospheric requirements, translation systems for over 200 languages, and seating arrangements that accommodate everything from gas-phase beings to silicon-based life forms." The amphitheater itself was a marvel of collaborative engineering. Human architects had worked with HFY environmental specialists and visiting alien engineers to create a space where dozens of different species could gather comfortably. The structure seemed to flow organically from the landscape, while incorporating technological systems that would have been impossible for any single species to develop. That afternoon's presentation would be crucial. Elder Zimthara and a panel of human and HFY representatives were scheduled to address the galactic delegations, explaining how the integration had succeeded and what lessons might be applied elsewhere in the galaxy. The stakes were enormous, not just for Earth and the HFY, but for the future of interspecies relations throughout civilized space. As delegates filed into the amphitheater, Elena took her position beside the main stage. The audience was unlike anything in human experience. Beings of every conceivable shape and biochemistry, united only by their intelligence and their curiosity about what had happened on this small world at the galaxy's edge. Elder Zimthara began the presentation with a simple statement that would be quoted throughout the galaxy for generations to come. "We came to Earth expecting to die. Instead, we learned how to live." What followed was a detailed analysis of the integration process, presented jointly by human and HFY researchers who had studied every aspect of their species' collaboration. They discussed the initial challenges, the breakthrough moments, and the unexpected synergies that had emerged from combining different approaches to problem-solving. But it was the practical demonstrations that truly captured the delegates' attention. Mixed teams of humans and HFY showed how their combined technologies had achieved results that neither species could have accomplished alone. Water purification systems that operated at impossible efficiency levels. Agricultural techniques that could support complex ecosystems on previously barren worlds. Construction methods that created buildings which were both aesthetically beautiful and functionally superior to anything in either species' previous experience. "The key insight," explained Dr. James Okafor, the xenobiology professor who had become one of Earth's leading experts on interspecies psychology, is that diversity enhances rather than threatens intelligence. When different species share knowledge and perspectives, the result isn't compromise. It's innovation. End quote. A delegate from the Silicon Confederation, a collective of crystalline beings who communicated through harmonic resonance, posed a question that translated roughly as, how do you resolve conflicts between incompatible approaches to problem solving? The answer came from an unexpected source. 8-year-old Maria Hoffman, who had become something of a celebrity for her friendship with young HFY refugees. She took the stage with her best friend Pekthira, a HFY child who had learned to create light patterns that perfectly complemented Maria's drawings. We don't try to make our ideas the same, Maria explained with the simple clarity that only children possess. We make them work together. Like when I draw a picture, and Peck makes lights to go with it. The picture and the lights are different, but together they make something better than either one alone. As if to demonstrate, the two children performed one of their collaborative art pieces. Maria, creating flowing drawings on a large canvas, while Pekthira generated complementary light patterns that seemed to bring the images to life. The result was something that transcended the artistic traditions of both species, creating beauty that was uniquely their own. The demonstration left the galactic delegates in stunned silence. Here were two children, from species that had never encountered each other before 6 months ago, creating art that represented an entirely new form of cultural expression. It was a perfect metaphor for what the integration had achieved on a larger scale. High Commander Vex Thul, who had remained conspicuously quiet throughout the presentation, finally stood to address the assembly. His reptilian features showed an emotional complexity that surprised those who knew the hegemony's reputation for cold calculation. The Council sent the HFY to this world, believing that failure was inevitable, he said, his words carrying through translation systems to every being in the amphitheater. We believed that intelligence naturally led to competition, that cooperation between species was possible only under external coercion or threat. He paused, looking around the amphitheater at the incredible diversity of beings who had gathered to witness Earth's achievement. We were wrong. And because we were wrong, the galaxy has been deprived of possibilities we never imagined existed. What Vex Thul revealed next sent shockwaves through the galactic diplomatic community. The Hegemony Council hadn't just used the HFY as an experiment on Earth. They had been conducting similar resettlement operations throughout their territory for centuries, always choosing worlds they expected to fail, always confirming their belief that interspecies integration was impossible. Thousands of refugee populations have been placed on worlds throughout hegemony space, he explained. In every case, the results matched our predictions. Conflict, segregation, eventual collapse, or absorption. We used these failures as justification for our policies of species isolation and controlled contact. The admission triggered intense discussions among the delegates, many of whom represented civilizations that had accepted hegemony guidance in their own interspecies policies. If the Council's fundamental assumptions about intelligence and cooperation were wrong, then much of galactic civilization might be built on false premises. But it was Elder Zimthara who provided the most profound response to Vex Thul's confession. Rising slowly from her position on the panel, her patterns displaying deep contemplation mixed with hope, she addressed not just the hegemony commander, but the entire assembly. The question is not why the other attempts failed, she said. The question is, why this attempt succeeded. And I believe the answer lies not in any special quality of humans or HFY, but in the choice that was made when we first arrived. She gestured toward the humans in the audience, scientists, engineers, teachers, farmers, artists, and countless others who had volunteered their time and energy to help strangers from another world. When faced with 6 million refugees, these people could have chosen fear, resentment, or indifference. Instead, they chose compassion, not as government policy or diplomatic strategy, but as individual moral decisions made by millions of ordinary beings. The insight resonated throughout the assembly as delegates considered their own species' responses to similar challenges. How many civilizations had failed to achieve integration not because it was impossible, but because they had never truly chosen to make it work? Dr. Vasquez found herself thinking about all the small moments that had made the integration possible. Marcus Thompson deciding to build better housing for refugee families, Maria Hoffman choosing to befriend a frightened alien child, thousands of volunteers learning new languages, adapting new technologies, creating new solutions to unprecedented challenges. Perhaps, suggested a delegate from the aquatic republics, the real experiment should be whether other worlds can replicate Earth's success, whether the choice for compassion can be made deliberately rather than spontaneously. The suggestion sparked intense debate among the delegates. But gradually, a consensus began to emerge. Several civilizations volunteered to host refugee populations under different conditions, with Earth serving as a model and resource for integration techniques. Others proposed exchange programs that would allow young beings from different species to grow up together, as Maria and Pekthira had done. Most significantly, the Hegemony Council announced a complete review of their policies regarding interspecies contact and refugee resettlement. For the first time in their recorded history, they admitted that their fundamental assumptions about intelligence and civilization might be wrong. As the conference concluded and delegates began departing for their home systems, Elena stood once again on the observation deck of the research station. The sky above New Geneva was busy with traffic, as alien vessels departed for destinations across the galaxy, carrying with them new ideas about what was possible when different species chose cooperation over competition. Below her, the settlement continued its daily life. Humans and HFY working together on projects that would have been impossible for either species alone, children playing games that incorporated traditions from both cultures, families forming bonds that transcended the boundaries between stars. The Hegemony fleet remained in orbit, but their mission had changed from observation to coordination. They were now facilitating contact between Earth and other worlds, interested in attempting their own integration experiments. What had begun as a punishment designed to demonstrate human limitations had become the foundation for a new approach to galactic civilization. Dr. Vasquez, Kethmore said, joining her at the observation deck's viewing wall. I've been analyzing the long-term projections for galactic integration based on Earth's model. The possibilities are extraordinary. Elena smiled, watching a group of mixed-species children playing in the plaza below. Their games incorporated elements from dozens of different cultures, creating new traditions that belonged to neither human nor HFY heritage but to something entirely new. The first generation of true galactic citizens. What do you think the Hegemony will do next? She asked. Kethmore's patterns shifted to display mathematical models that showed potential futures spreading like branches from a tree. They're already implementing new policies based on what they've observed here. More importantly, they're questioning assumptions that have guided galactic politics for thousands of years. As if summoned by their conversation, Admiral Chen's voice came through the station's communication system. All stations, we have an incoming priority transmission from the Hegemony Council's central authority. The transmission, when it came, was unlike any previous communication from the galactic government. Instead of High Commander Vex Thule, the message came from the Council's Supreme Coordinator, a being whose species was unknown to Earth's databases, but whose words would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what was possible. Citizens of Earth and HFY Prime, the message began. Your success has forced the Hegemony Council to confront fundamental errors in our understanding of intelligence, cooperation, and the possibilities for interspecies civilization. What followed was an announcement that sent waves of excitement and hope across human space and beyond. The Hegemony was formally requesting Earth's assistance in developing new approaches to refugee resettlement and interspecies integration. More than that, they were proposing the establishment of Earth as the galaxy's first interspecies integration institute, a center for research and training in the techniques that had made the HFY integration so successful. Your world has proven that the choice between competition and cooperation is exactly that. A choice. The Supreme Coordinator continued. We request your guidance in helping the galaxy learn to make better choices. Elena felt tears forming in her eyes as she contemplated the implications. 6 million refugees, dumped on Earth as a burden and a punishment, had become the foundation for a transformation that could reshape civilization throughout the galaxy. The simple human choice to treat strangers with compassion had challenged assumptions that had guided galactic politics for millennia. As the message concluded and normal life resumed in the settlement below, Elena thought about all the ordinary humans who had made extraordinary choices in the months since the HFY arrived. Teachers who had learned new languages to communicate with refugee children. Engineers who had adapted their designs to accommodate alien physiology. Farmers who had modified their techniques to grow food for beings from another star. None of them had set out to transform galactic civilization. They had simply chosen to help when help was needed. To welcome strangers who had nowhere else to go. To build bridges instead of walls between different ways of understanding the universe. That choice, multiplied across millions of individual decisions, had proven more powerful than any weapon, more influential than any technology, more transformative than any government policy. It had shown the galaxy that intelligence without compassion led to stagnation, while intelligence guided by moral choice could create possibilities that no single species could imagine alone. The future stretched before them now, bright with potential that had been hidden for centuries behind assumptions about the nature of intelligence and civilization. Earth would no longer be an isolated world at the galaxy's edge, but a beacon of hope for beings throughout the stars who had been told that cooperation was impossible, that differences could only lead to conflict. 6 million refugees had come to Earth expecting punishment and found mercy instead. In choosing compassion over cruelty, humanity had accidentally discovered the key to unlocking the galaxy's true potential. The experiment intended to demonstrate human limitations had instead revealed possibilities that would reshape the stars themselves. And in settlements across Earth, children from different worlds played together in the light of two suns, creating the future one friendship at a time.